Hi, this is Neil Buchanan again with Rock Our World, and I'm going to try and tie up some loose ends here in on this segment or edition or episode. And I've noticed I just watched my last two editions there, and I noticed I made a couple of mistakes. Hope you picked them up. I at one point referred to 17 years, and I meant 1700 years, the space of time between the Constantine conspiracy, I'm going to call it, and the progress of the restoration of all things up to present, which is about 1700 years. And I am oversimplifying these things. My son-in-law suggests I make a graph. I'll see if I can do that. But it would be just from Jesus, Yeshua, we had full restoration, quickly dropped to zero, or close to zero, rock bottom, at Constantine, and then made a slow climb back to where we are right now. And we've got a ways to go, but we've made good progress. And I'm, in a sense, I'm trying to bring everybody up to speed, at least the speed I'm at. That doesn't mean there's other guys out there know more or can explain it better. My expectation is there's several thousand guys doing what I'm doing all at the same time in a whole bunch of different ways. That's the way the Lord is working with the last days. It's He got everybody ready ahead of time, and then okay, the show begins. And my strong sense is these are the last days. Like we're going to have the first really serious birth pang, and the birth pangs of the Messiah right ahead of us. Anyway, I don't want to be a fearmonger. Just the whole idea, or one of the ideas, is that we prepare ahead of time. We don't want to be caught unawares. And so I got that mistake. I noticed another one. I made this comment from Revelation to Malachi, and I meant from Genesis to Malachi. That's in our Christian edition of the Torah, prophets, and writings. That's the order we have. It's a little different with the Jewish people, but they have the same books. And that doesn't mean that what I've been calling the inspired commentary is not important. It is. But a commentary doesn't have value if you don't know what it's talking about, like what it's commentating about. So what it's doing is explaining further the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. And that was Paul's intent of his letters, was to explain further what God had already revealed, or Jesus, up to that point. And I don't think I finished a thought in there too about the snapshot of the four Gospels and the book of Acts, that it was like a snapshot of what was happening immediately after Jesus died, for that first generation. And we see the believers were keeping the Sabbath day, the new moon festival, and the yearly festivals, which includes what we've come to call Pentecost, which is misnamed purposely to mislead us away from the festivals we find in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and lots of other places. That's where they're listed. We actually find a lot of those details in those three books I mentioned, those extra books that got kicked out, in my opinion, and we'll tackle them later. I figure this whole thing, I'll try and do it in a chronological order that it came to me, and not that is the best way to do it, but just keep a little bit of order here. And now I kind of lost where I was at, but I'll get back to it. My mind always does. I wanted to also, the snapshot. And they were dealing with things at the temple. Like the temple service was still carrying on, and they were involved in it, and they respected it. I mean, it was part of their lives. So that's a bit of a tough one, and I will spend more time later on, because that was a hard one for me to contemplate, that the temple and the temple service and the priesthood is not done away with. Because the first group I was with, the Worldwide Church of God, I won't say I know specifically what they taught, but I got the impression that, well, that's done away with. And things like, not sure what they said about circumcision, but I knew that wasn't done away with. So, I mean, I made sure my son was circumcised, and he went ahead and did that for his sons too. And I've been done because my mom was a nurse, and at the time she was going to nursing school, that was what was taught. It was a hygienic practice. So anyway, back to worldwide, like we kind of in the end had a mixture of, well, some things are done away with and some are not, which becomes a problem because either the Torah is legitimate or it's not. And I've gone through that quite a bit. So yes, it is legitimate, and then we got to deal with these details. Well, what about the priesthood and the sacrifices in the temple and so on? So back to Acts and the four Gospels, we see that those things are going on. You know, Jesus didn't do away with it because that's what they were doing. They were doing all this stuff. I want to go to Daniel 2. I did mention that the Lord showed me the day after I picked Rock Our World. He showed me this vision from Daniel 2. Well, I finally went and read it. I didn't know where in Daniel it was. It was all of chapter 2, and it's not Daniel's vision. It was Nebuchadnezzar's. And he had this dream, and it really bothered him big time. So he lined up all his religious people. You know, they called them magicians and all these guys. But that's kind of what religion is, you know, it includes all this stuff. And he said, okay, tell me both the dream I had and its interpretation. And they said, wow, nobody's ever asked that before. How can we get inside your head? And anyway, Daniel came along and he said, well, I can't, but there's a God in heaven that can do that. And he prayed to God, and God revealed to Daniel the dream and its interpretation. And then Daniel went ahead and told Nebuchadnezzar. Anyway, the sum total of the whole thing is, the vision that I described is very apropos to what I'm doing here. I'm describing in these last days, God's going to end Babylon. And that statue, in fact, started with the head of gold, which was Nebuchadnezzar, and then went down through the ages, and it's still in operation, this system of Babylon. And it's not just economic, it's the whole society we have. So it's religious, it's economic, it's social, the money, the whole money system, you know, the calendar that operates with it. You know, we got to know when business days are and when they aren't, and all that stuff. And in a lot of senses, Babylon wants to run 24/7. You know, let's make money all the time. And then we get caught in that because we have jobs that take us away from our families and, you know, get us focused on making money and buying stuff. Anyway, that's all Babylon, and I will talk more about that, you know, specifically on this, you know, the whole system of Babylon, and go back to this statue too. I'm hoping my daughter's quite a gifted artist. I should get her to make a picture of this rock coming out of heaven, out of the outer space, hitting this system on its feet, the final configuration, let's say, of Babylon. Which would be a cooperation, let's say, of 10 groups of nations. You know, there's speculation on these things, but in the last days, there will be a last-ditch attempt to try and make this thing work. And it'll get harder and harder and harder. The world economy starts collapsing, so there's measures taken, and martial law, and, you know, all kinds of ideas have come up. Anyway, I'm hoping my daughter can create a picture from Daniel 12. I just talked to her, and she's on it. You know, she's going to read all of Daniel 12, and we'll see what we end up with. Anyway, it would be part of my, I don't know, channel or whatever you call this stuff. Anyway, I wanted to cover Daniel 2, and then I want to kind of reiterate what one of my vision is to be a resource for home churches. But I wanted to tell the viewers or the audience the things that I have learned in the restoration of all things in a chronological order. And I covered the festivals, Sabbaths, and I got here pigs, so that we don't eat pigs. But, you know, that's a small one. That's not something we make a big thing of. But still, it's like Yeshua said. He said when they came to him about, I forget what the issue was, but he said, you guys, you go to all the trouble and make sure you tithe even your spices that you grow in the corner of the garden, and then you do something dumb, you know, swallow the camel. You know, I'm mixing a few of the talks together, but they in the end he said you miss the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. But he said don't leave the little things undone. So anyway, I'd call the pig issue a little bit smaller than some of the big ones, but it's still not to leave it undone. Anyway, cover that a little bit. Gifts of the Spirit, I covered a little bit. The houses of Israel, very important. Cover that. Oh, and I brought, rather than my terrible typing to put into, this whole thing, I brought pictures. Here's the book. Ooh, let's get this centered. Rick Joyner's The Final Quest. He has 3 books. Get them. Or they might even all be in one book by now. Here's Eddie Chumney's, get this centered here. Eddie Chumney's Restoring the Two Houses of Israel. He also has the Bride of Christ. That's who is the Bride of Christ. That's very, very important. That taught me a ton of stuff. And I'm going to go to that next in this chronological order. Who is the Bride of Christ? I could expand on that. And then I have this last book. Get this. I'm dyslexic. Who is Israel by Batya Wootten. So that's easier than typing. So. And Rick Joyner also, not Rick Joyner, Eddie Chumney also has that one on the 7 festivals. And it's, I'm going to say, in my opinion, less valuable, but it gives you a starting point, anyway, learning about the festivals, because Christians don't know anything about the festivals. I'll list them real quick. The Passover, the Days of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Firstfruits, which we missed in worldwide, I'm not sure why. And it's actually part of the whole feast of the Feast of Weeks, because it's the starting point. You count 7 weeks, and then the day after that, you celebrate the Feast of Weeks. And that's pointed out in the Book of Jubilees, that's actually one feast. It's the first day is the Feast of Firstfruits, and the last day is the Feast of Weeks. Anyway, there's a lot of controversy in this particular feast because it doesn't seem real clear when you start the count. And I'm going to say I think I can make it clear. But we'll worry about that later. So that's 3 of the feasts, and then we have the Feast of Trumpets in the fall. There's a grouping in the fall, a grouping in spring, summer, fall, 3 times a year. That's where that comes from. 3 times a year come before me. And in the fall, we got the Feast of Trumpets, which is actually teruah in Hebrew means a great noise. So I would say the Feast of the Great Noise, but trumpets is reasonable because that's often part of the great noise is the trumpets. And you can learn this stuff by doing a word search on teruah. I did that one time, and it was very interesting. And one of the uses of that is in the Psalms, and David was a kid that he invented rock music. David said the teruah, or great noise, made out of trumpets and cymbals and guitars and whatever they had in their time. All kinds of musical instruments make this huge noise. That's rock music. So David invented it. Anyway, I am kidding. Music is music. It's good. Used properly. There's no horrible music. The Lord had to correct me. Even heavy metal music has a place. And if we throw away any type of music, we throw away the people that love that music. So it is important to be sensitive about these things. And the music isn't the issue. Satan isn't in certain types of music. And I remember worldwide, well, probably lots of people did this. The Beatles were horrible when they first came. Well, man, some of the most beautiful music, you put that to a symphony, is absolutely wonderful. The Beatles music. So anyway, the Beatles were redeemed from Satan by religion in time, and we'll probably look at all types of music in time. That'll be that way. The music is good if used properly, and it ministers to your soul. So, this chronological order, I had got as far as who is the Bride of Christ, and then I showed you all those books. That book helped me a lot. A lot of Yeshua's statements that he made in the Gospels are hard to understand, and it's part of the restorational things, in my opinion, that God did all these things. You know, he made it hard to understand, but he would reveal things through his Holy Spirit in the course of time, using this idea of the restoration of all things. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about just a little bit, because I'll expand on all these things in time. The journey through the wilderness that the Israelites did for 40 years was a prophecy of the last days, and never entered my mind in any way, shape, or form until I came into the Messianic movement. And the Messianic movement was excellent, or has been excellent. I always called it an internet religion. The cage, the lid on the cage was let loose. You know, you couldn't bottle this one up. Anybody, anywhere could throw their 2 bits in, and there's lots of people out there that do studying, and they have the Holy Spirit guiding them, and they come up with bits and pieces. And God does want us to work together. There's no one guy has it all figured out. That's why the parts of the body of the church, you know, all those metaphors were explained. I think the Apostle Paul did one of the best jobs in his writings. You know, we need all the parts of the body. That's how God works. And the gifts are given to the body to build the body up. And the gift of tongues is the least useful in building up the body. And the gift of prophecy, he pointed out, was one of the most effective ways. And I'll talk about that too, because we had a lot of prophecies given to my wife and I in around the year 2000. There was a few years in there. We were amongst the charismatics, and we went to so many conferences, and it was like inevitable. They pick Pat and I out of the crowd and give us this big long prophecy, and then they record it and hand us the tape. And we copied these all down, and in the course of time, I've come to see, hey, this is very, very accurate. You know, God was working through these people, and a lot of the information in these prophecies, I'm going to say there was thousands of bits of information. What appeared, some of it didn't appear to make sense, but a lot of it appeared to be like a compliment for right now. You know, oh man, God said something good about me. Turned out it was the future. You know, and here it is 16 years later, and there's very specific things happening today that were prophesied back in these prophecies. So anyway, just I'll expand more on all these things in time, but the gifts of the Holy Spirit. How did I get off on that? I was going through the wilderness. Oh, the Messianics. The lid was off control of doctrine. Let's put it that way. And there's lots of guys out there that are on their own. They're kind of drifting away from the church system because they're fed up with it. You know, that it's a little too slow or a little too sleep, and you know, they're asking God about things, and He starts showing them. So then they write books, and they get rolling. And anyway, the Messianic movement was sort of a conglomeration of these types of people that had lots of good information, but a bit here and a bit there. So the next challenge is to get these guys together and share their information without squabbling, you know. And it was often said that the Messianic movement was actually the messy movement. You know, it got to be a lot of squabbling, and still is to this day. Nonetheless, there's individuals that and individual groups that choose to grow up. Let's put it real simple. And we went to one of them at the Feast in Gary, South Dakota. It was a wonderful experience, and a whole pile of people there came there that had some maturity to them, and we just had a great time. And now back to where I started this whole thing, the journey through the wilderness. It was the Messianic movement where I first heard this, and then it just became as clear as can be. The whole of the Torah, prophets, and writings is just full of prophecies about the last days. It was almost like God wrote everything with at least some content, giving us information about the last days. So obviously He wants us to know as much as possible about them, so we're prepared ahead of time. And He's looking for His bride. The bride has not been made yet. And when you read these visions that Rick Joyner had, I'm going to say they're visions straight from God, and the only challenge was for Rick to keep his own thoughts out of them. So it's a direct message from God, and he paints a really beautiful picture, God does, of how this is all going to come about. And he uses the metaphor of assembling an army. But it's the same, he's talking about the same thing as the metaphor of the bride of Christ. So the bride and the army are the same group of people. And in fact, there's two groups of people. John saw the 144,000, that's the bride. And of course, this is my opinion, you've heard lots. That's the bride, and then the bigger group that he saw immediately after, it was like the next verse, he said, and then I saw, this vast number, too vast to number, and that's what Rick saw as the second army. There was a first army of 144,000, and it was obvious Rick didn't know the connection, but that's the connection. That's the bride, and it's also the army of God. Then the second group isn't quite as well refined, and that's up to us how well refined we get. They were also a very awesome army, but not quite up to the standard of this first one, which were perfectly in order and followed instructions perfectly. Like they did their job. They'd learned to do their job, to hear the voice of the Lord, follow the instructions, not argue, not procrastinate, get all those things out of ourselves. That's the cleansing of the bride. That's how we make ourselves white. I hope to be amongst that group, but I'm like all of you out there. We're not in a good state at present, and God is challenging us to clean up and get rid of those negative parts of our human nature. And God's going to be putting trials in front of us to help us to do that. Don't waste your trials. You'll find that in that vision. And I started with this whole thing with the journey through the wilderness. So the 40 years journey is a prophecy of the last days. And this is my own theory. I think the last days is 40 years. Well, I'll talk more about that. Nonetheless, doesn't matter how long it is. If it's 3.5 or 7, and you're prepared for 40, you're better shape than the other way around, right? So then I'm going to talk a little bit about the full gospel businessman, and I would like you to actually go on their website. I haven't done this. I'm not very good with my computer and searching things and so on, but my wife tells me if you go to Good News TV, and whether that's .ca, I don't know, but Good News TV will bring you up whatever information you need to get to this site. And there's all the programs that we have done for 2 years there. I would like you to go to the one that I did with Ken Clark. And the reason being, just the way it all worked out. I'll talk more about these shows because the two things are connected. The full gospel businessmen are a wonderful organization getting people to that first level on the mountain that Rick Joyner saw, the level of salvation. That's the first step you take. And then what you do past that is a combination of what you choose to do and what God has put in your heart to do, in my opinion. So I would like you to watch this one with Ken Clark, because the way it turned out, it was a beautiful answer. I posed this question. I said, how did God hear this person's voice? Like in the story, he was telling, God told this guy to get on a plane and fly to Hawaii. And I came back later in the story and I said, now how did that guy hear God's voice? Like all of us want to know how to hear God's voice. But how does that come about? Anyway, Ken answered the question with a story. And I thought it was quite beautiful the way it all was orchestrated by the Holy Spirit. And how they say a picture tells a story of 1,000 words. Well, a video of this explains how to hear God's voice using a story. It's much more effective than me trying to, well, A, you do this, B, you do this, and get your hair straight and put on the right clothes, and you know what I mean. Men have come up with ideas, but God isn't the same as man. God says, he says, my thoughts aren't your thoughts, and my heart's not your heart. So then the very last thing I want to cover, the thing that God's taught me very recently, took him 7 years, is how the calendar works and how to find the Sabbaths, the new moon festival, and the yearly festivals. There's actually, in a sense, there's two calendars going on. There's the moon cycle and the sun cycle, and you can take kind of a preview by, if you get the book of Enoch, just read the whole section on, I think it's Uriel the angel took Enoch and showed him how the cycles work. And there was some information missing that is found other places. That's how God designed the Word. And anyway, that'll be the last thing I talk about. And I find it the most exciting because it's the newest thing that I learned. And most of those 7 years was spent getting rid of paradigms. So anyway, I'll sign off and talk to you next time.